this is more than just loneliness. This is starting to develop into anxiety. This is potentially starting to develop into suicidal ideation. And so we had to sit down as a chaplain corps, as a team, and say, okay, what can we do in because we provide support, right? Like we're not in charge there, but we do provide spiritual support. What can we do to provide support to help mitigate mental health crises? Because we already know, like in America, the mental health crisis is larger anyways. 90% of our problems can be fixed with a nap and a snack.
Yes.
and that's a really, that's a really very small view of the 5,000 feet view. But, I think there's something that's just really beautiful in the simplicity of not overcomplicating faith, not overcomplicating needs. Is there always more we could do? Absolutely. But that's with anything. That's with any social program. That's with any faith tradition. That's anything. There's always more we can do. And so it's my hope, that the families that I serve and the population that I serve, that they come to the table knowing that they're loved, that they're cared for, and we're doing the best that we can to serve them in the ways that they need, but that we're also seeing them for who they are, that they can come to the table and be 100% authentically who they are in whatever that looks like and whatever that mess is.
It's Uncommon Good, the podcast where we chat to ordinary people doing uncommon good in service of our common humanity. My name is Polly Reese. Fam, I am delighted to bring you today Tori Mick. Tori is a director of religious education for the U.S. Army. What that means is that she is a civilian working for the Army, helping support the chaplains that are looking after the spiritual health of the enlisted service people serving in the U.S. Army. A big job, and we thank her for her service. A quick content warning off the top. We do talk a lot about COVID. We talk about the challenges of being a person who supports service people. We talk a lot about trauma and loneliness and mental health. So as always, if these things are not right for you to listen to, feel free to switch this one off and we'll catch you in the next one. A disclaimer, all of the opinions expressed herein are the opinions of Tori herself and not necessarily a reflection of the U.S. Army. We talk about what it is to go to the truck stop Buc-ee's. We talk about our history of performing show choir together. We talk about the work of looking after all of these brave servicewomen and men and non-binary folk as they are seeking to serve us. I learned an incredible amount in this interview, and I hope that you enjoy.
So I have a stuffed lion, and my dog Roscoe has a stuffed lion. And then I also have a stuffed Buc-ee beaver from Buc-ee's.
What is Buc-ee's? I don't know.
Buc-ee's is the best rest stop you will ever stop in. If you are in Texas, Alabama, word on the street is they're getting one up here. I'm very excited. So their mascot is a beaver, and his name is Buc-ee. And they have Buc-ee merch. It's like this massive rest stop, but they have really clean bathrooms. And that's the thing that's really great. Like if I travel I-10, which, goes east to west across the southern US, when I lived in Louisiana, I planned my stops by the Buc-ee's.
Right.
Because I could always, you can guarantee that you can get in and out quickly. You can get a meal. You can get, a drink if you need it. It's not, but the running joke about Buc-ee's too is that you walk in, it's a normal gas station, right? You walk in planning to spend, go to the bathroom, spend $6 on your snack. You've gone to the gift side. And so you've also found the 3 t-shirts that you need, the onesie that you need for that baby gift. And you come out and you've spent your life savings at Buc-ee's. And so it's kind of this really funny cultural phenomenon, but it happens to everybody. True story.
Buc-ee's is the IKEA of fuel stops.
Yes. But also solid gift stuff. Yeah, I mean, the air fresheners that I like for my car come from Buc-ee's. And so anytime I'm driving back and forth to San Antonio. I need to stock up on those air fresheners for my car. Not that, the other brands are bad, but like these are cuter. Like
Sure.
I get they're leather that's stamped and then scented. And so, I mean, who doesn't want a leather stamped air freshener over like a tree? Me personally, I would rather have the leather stamped that says come and take it with the cannon, which is a nod to Texas, than a tree. But to each their own.
There's just no comparison for a business like that in the Northeast. You might get lucky to find a Flying J if you're on a toll road, and the place where and the off ramp that you're stopping by is the closest travel plaza on road travel plaza is like 50 miles. But that's it. What would be the closest? I guess in Philly we have Wawa. In central Pennsylvania there's Sheetz, but not even remotely close to what you're describing. The log line for Buc-ee's, first and foremost, for those of you who are not from this part of the southern stroke Midwestern US, Buc-ee's is spelled BUCM-EES, Buc-ee's. The log line on their website is Buc-ee's is a chain of travel centers known for clean bathrooms and many fueling positions. Perfect.
It's magical. It's magical. And if you ever travel with a group, because they do allow like charter buses and things like that, you laugh. It would have been perfect when we were touring with the Continentals, because there's like 50 bathrooms on each side. And so like everybody can go to the bathroom at the same time. Like our bathroom stops would not have taken an hour. They would have taken, solidly 15 minutes. Get everybody in and out. So
there are travel explainer videos about Buc-ee's, specifically logline 24 hours, and this is of course is in all capital letters, so that means that it's being shouted 24 hours at the world's largest gas station.
They pay their people a livable wage, and they give them 3 weeks of vacation, and like they get benefits whether they're part-time or full-time. So I appreciate companies who are like, hey, we also see value like in our workers, and we want to make sure that you guys like stay with us but also can make a living.
Google's I'm still just absolutely obsessed, fascinated.
Are the Google reviews awesome?
Well, I'm not in one in the review section yet, but so Google has the YouTube clip. It's excerpted chapters from the video. Is good heavens, this video is a solid like 14-15 minutes long. One, they have a food director.
Yes.
Incredible.
Yes, because in South Texas we take our barbecue very seriously.
So I'm just gonna speed through this, and clearly everyone's on the same page. Chapter 1, world's largest gas station. Chapter 2, fever chips. There you go. Chapter 3, interview with a food director. Chapter 4, the bathroom tour. Chapter 5, Coca-Cola. Chapter 6, snacks. Chapter 7, taste test, garlic beef jerky. Chapter 8, taste test, spicy saltine crackers. Chapter 9, ranking the snacks. Chapter 10, conclusion, and Buc-ee's banana pudding.
Yes.
Wow. Well done, Buc-ee's. Whew. Oh, good Lord. There's even been like a CBS 60 Minutes.
Oh, yeah.
Buc-ee's. Oh, wow.
Yeah, it's a whole thing. Like, it's not just like, oh, hey, there's, one. It's a whole subculture.
So we're dancing around the way that we met a bit. So I suppose we should give a little bit of context. But we met when both of us were both much more Christian than we are now, but working as participants in a Christian show choir. The overview, like the 2-minute description of like what this experience is for the uninitiated.
So it was a touring group of teens and adults who put on a show. It had skits, it had music, and basically, yeah, we would put on this show every night. We would travel. I typically only traveled in the summer. Did you do any spring or fall tours?
I did do a couple of fall tours. Yeah.
So they toured year round, but they would send them to various parts of the US. And the idea was that we would be able to talk about faith through music and through skits and things of that nature. So
I'm looking at the Wikipedia. Evangelical Christian nonprofit org based in Ventura. Yes. Founded in 1967 with a mission to, quote, advance the kingdom of Jesus Christ through the world, around the world through music missions, leadership development, and performing arts ministries. And then the second sentence of the logline is, it dissolved in 2011.
It did dissolve. But there are still, I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, but there are still continental groups that exist in other countries, because for a while there were several in other countries. They had grown the organization globally.
Yes, I do remember that. I remember these ridiculously well produced video packages that they would show us during orientations about the international editions. I don't know how many more internationals there still were. Yeah, go for it.
I think, and don't quote me, but I think that the Latin Continental still exist.
Let's see. Latin Continental singers. Yeah, it looks like there's still content that's being produced.
Put out.
Yeah. That's there was, here's how you know, there was a COVID virtual choir video released.
Oh, interesting.
Cuando pienso en el Señor, when I think about the Lord. Yeah, cool. Wow. I remember similar things. Like I remember the touring component. Usually the tour would begin with like a rehearsal week or two.
Yeah, rehearsal camp.
A base location. Yeah, rehearsal camp. Many of them were in Southern California, Santa Barbara, Oxnard when it was smaller seasons. Close to Ventura, they're South Central. For some tours that happened further in the eastern US, I remember there being a short-lived Kansas City outpost.
Yes, it was Mizzou.
Yeah.
I actually went to rehearsal camp at Mizzou for my second tour, because I toured twice. I did the first tour, which is where I met you, right. And we had rehearsal camp. Was it No, it wasn't Belmont. What was the college? College in Westmont. There we go. Yeah. So Westmont, we had rehearsal camp at Westmont that first year. And then my second, we had rehearsal camp at Mizzou.
Wow. Oh, goodness gracious. What a bunch of very repressed evangelical horny teenagers, all forced and young adults. Like I think that the age cutoff was like 20, 26, 27, somewhere around there. Forced onto a bus in each other's presence with puberty and hormones and body odors for 2 to 3 months.
You know what, though? One of my favorite things about, like, I don't have, and maybe because I didn't tour as often as you did, like, I got to do it twice. I had a blast both times. And
wow.
And which was awesome. We had a blast on that tour. But one of my favorite things about tour was that we stayed in host homes every night.
Yes.
And so we, every single night, were staying with people from the churches that we were performing in. And so we just got to meet and experience really unique situations and really unique people. Like I went on tour W when I was with you. One of my favorite homes, the host happened to be, we were in Walla Walla, Washington. Never in my life have I been to Walla Walla, Washington. But the host that I stayed with happened to be the local Caleb DJ. And he and his family had also, like, they were a traveling, like, family group, singing group, etc. And so one of the things that we'd always gripe about on tour was every day they had asked the hosts to pack us lunch, and every day the lunch was typically a turkey sandwich, a bag of chips, an apple, something like that. And
like a Panera box lunch type thing.
And about 2 weeks in, you're done with the turkey sandwich the chips. Like you want other food. And so sometimes they always tried to make sure that when we stopped for lunch, because we were on a charter bus, when we stopped for lunch, it was a place that had multiple options for food if we wanted to buy food. But, buying food was really expensive, and you didn't necessarily have buying food money every day, or at least I didn't have buying food money every day. There were certainly people on our tours who did, and who did. That was not my life. So, but this particular host, the wife the night before was like, hey, so we travel a lot as a family, as a singing group, and we know the struggle. So if you're good with it, I'm going to make you guys Caesar salads. Just keep the Tupperware. We don't care. And I was like, oh, thank you so much. Because like nobody ever, like it was always, you didn't want to be rude to your host, right? And so it was always like, are you good with a turkey sandwich, or would you like peanut butter and jelly? And so you switch it up. When somebody came to you and was like, I would like to give you a salad, you were like, oh my gosh, green things. Right. Like my body will thank you. Because, and the reality was like, we were dancing, we were singing, we were doing a lot of physical exertion. And so we needed those calories, but also we were sitting on a bus all day traveling to our next location. So, yeah.
That's exactly the thing that it was. You had 2 weeks of this really intense rehearsal camp where you were spending hours and hours learning, for most of us who were otherwise uninitiated, really, really pretty complex choreography. And rehearsing the music as well. But the music you were given ahead of time, like you could learn it. You were expected to be like more or less off book by the time that you arrived. And so I remember like I would lose like 10 pounds during the 2 week rehearsal.
Yeah.
And then gain it all back on tour.
Absolutely. Yeah, because the rehearsal camp, you're dancing 8 to 10, sometimes 12 hours a day. And you're like, I cannot get enough calories. Like, where are the Oreos with the peanut butter? Like, I am struggling. So we lived on a charter bus.
Yeah,
we lived on a charter bus.
And like a lit and heated pool, a stocked pantry with more green and delicious green and healthy and living things than like all of like my parents were like elder Gen Xers and had greatest generation parents. So like the margarine and all of the processed things that to eat. So just insane the different walks of life you'd see.
Well, and like when I was, so every night when we would tour, we would be in these different churches, different activity rooms, different whatever. Right. And so we always, every night we had to do a run through because we would have to adjust the show. Right. And I remember one of my favorite churches that we ever performed in, and I don't think it was on Tour W, but it was here in the States. We were in a small rural town, and the pastor had invited us and was so excited and had seen Continentals somewhere else. But the community had never had. The church met in a double wide trailer. The church itself had 7 pews. It was the tiniest little country church, and we had barely any room to dance. We didn't actually do a whole lot of dancing that night. But I mean, you want to talk about one of the most welcoming congregations. They were so excited to have something going on in their town, to have us there. And we were super thrilled to be there. So,
those sorts of audiences where everybody is on the same page, everybody is excited to be there. And those can be sometimes once in a lifetime.
Absolutely.
I could go on reminiscing forever. I feel like, as much as shout out to founder Cam Floria, and then the chief artistic producer at the time, I believe it was Dean Butler. Yeah. Thank you both for the experiences that you created. I don't want to do it disservice, but you are a religious curriculum developer
for the U.S. Army. But yes, I do develop curriculum. It's kind of nutty, kind of crazy. So I am one of several. I happen to be one of the directors of religious education at Fort Leavenworth here in Kansas. And so, but there are, I think right now there are 55 of us, 56 of us who do this around the world.
Sure.
So we have what we call CONUS, or Continental United States. And then we have OCONUS, which is the overseas folks who do this. So they're in Europe, etc.
Sure.
So, but how I kind of describe it to people, because it's kind of, most people don't know it exists unless they're on a military installation in a chapel. And directors of religious education, we acronym everything. So we're DREs. DREs are an Army construct. And so you will only see them at Army locations, except if you have a joint base where two branches have joined. So Joint Base San Antonio, where I was last serving, is one of those places. So it has an Army location and two Air Force locations. And so you will see them if there is an Army location that's attached in the joint basing. So we have like Joint Base Lewis McChord, which is in Washington, Joint Base Langley Eustis, which is in Virginia. So you will see DREs there, but largely we're only on Army installations. And so what we do is we work with the chaplains to protect the Title X right to religious freedom for the soldiers and their families who are in our care. And so what that looks like for me as a DRE is the chaplains, right? They're typically doing worship services. They may be counseling. They're all of the programs, any type of religious program that we need to provide for. So it could be, hey, we have a Protestant women's Bible study that they need a room, they need curriculum, they need guidance, they need all those things. Or we have a Catholic men's study, or maybe we have a Wiccan group that wants to meet and do something educationally. And so I am the person who curates those resources, because the Army, while there is a separation of church and state, and that is a very serious thing. So like, you will never hear an Army church be called a church. They're called a chapel, because if they're a church, they violate the separation of church and state. They are not run the same as a church. The funding looks drastically different. Even the way the funding operates is drastically different. And, but like one of our big things, because we're in a pluralistic environment, we have all these different faith groups all the time. The biggest thing is you cannot denigrate another faith group. So it's built on mutual respect of faith and the understanding that your Title X right to religious freedom is a protection of your religious freedom, or for your religious freedom.
Yeah. That sort of space, I would say, is not something that certainly before I knew even the little bit that I do know about what you did, I could potentially conceive of as existing under the purview of the Army.
Sure. Well, and most people wouldn't. But the reality is, in the military, so I come from, both my parents are career Air Force, and military installations are miniature cities within their locations. So they have chapels. They have the commissary, which is where you get your groceries. They've got, if you're on an Air Force base, it's the BX. If it's the Army, it's the PX. But it's basically like your version of Walmart, where you can get clothes, you can get makeup, you can get, basic household things. Yeah. There's a gas station. There are childcare centers. There are all of these different things because people live on post or on base, etc. And so, but yeah, I think that's one of those places that people just kind of expect, with the separation of church and state, they would just look at you and go, hey, good luck, go find a place. And the reality is that some of the Army locations and whatnot are so far away from the rest of civilization that, and there's also a recognition on the Army's part that the families that we serve, 1% of Americans have served in the military. And so it's a subculture that a lot of people don't know a lot about. or they have their opinions about it from whatever news platform they choose to watch.
Sure.
Or they have opinions about it because of their own experiences. And so, but the Army recognizes that there can be a spiritual component to resiliency, to their mission. It's not something that's forced. It's obviously something that the Army simply says, hey, we recognize that this might be beneficial to you being a soldier in the Army. And so we want to provide the resource if you want it. There are plenty of families who choose to come to chapel on post because they're around other military families. And there's this camaraderie with that when you're a family who's military and you walk into a church off post who maybe doesn't see a lot of military families, they don't know what to do with that. They don't know how to support you when you have a spouse who deploys, or when your kids are having trouble with the reintegration of your spouse when they come back from deployment, things like that. So,
There's a couple of things that you've touched on that I think are resonating for me. One, the tiny little town in the middle of central Pennsylvania where I was raised, there was a very small base. It was called Letterkenny. Letterkenny Army Depot and it was, even the tiny little town where I grew up, that was a town of 350 people, and they had 3 faith communities. So and how do you ask an active duty officer on potentially the one day, if it's a full day that they have off, I don't know how shifts work, to drive 10 miles to have a formative faith experience, exactly as you say, when it may not provide any actual need that they have, number one, and that community may be ill-equipped to give them whatever spiritual need to help with their spiritual needs. Number two, this notion of community is so important. I think especially as we're seeing spiritual communities emerge from lockdowns and trying to find the secret sauce to get people to come back to in-person gatherings. I think we're realizing that people really need community, and the social aspect of having of an affinity group like a spiritual community cannot be underestimated.
Absolutely.
Yeah. When you think about these misconceptions or frankly just ignorances, for me it's I'm ignorant in the truest sense of the word, that I just don't know these things, and why I'm so excited about this interview. What else do civilians, uninitiated, uninformed civilians, need to know about? I'll just go broad about military life in general. And I'll prompt by saying one of the things that you told me as we were beginning, and we were half joking about the seizure of classified documents at Mar-a-Lago, which was in the news at the time when we did the pre-interview, but then broadened it to talk generally about government and military life in general, is that a lot of those sorts of things that we think of as the uninformed, that we think of are very secret and very sexy and must be very intriguing, are actually just lots of really, really boring things.
Yes, that is very true. So things like, in fact, I'm sitting in an office, right, that has brown walls. Like, there's nothing there, there's not a lot of color. Everything's brown or camo or, and that's just like a funny, like quirky thing. So I always try, like, anything that I put out to people, whether it's like marketing stuff or whatever, I try to jazz it up with color, because there's not color to it. But, so for me, one of the areas, so my specialty is youth ministry, and that's what I got my master's in. Shout out to Memphis Theological Seminary. And I am super passionate about teenagers, specifically third culture kids, which are kids who have grown up. Typically, they're going to be military kids, diplomats kids, or kids of business people who have grown up outside of the culture which they were born in and outside of their parents' culture. And so it creates this third culture dynamic. And so, but with that comes its own set of challenges. I myself am a third culture kid. And what that means is that people look at my life. I have moved 18 times. People look at my life and they go, or they look even at my resume and they go, ugh, what's wrong with her? Why has she not stayed in one place long? Why, what happened that you, like, what bad thing happened that you've moved that many times?
Right.
And they automatically go to like something really horrible. And that's not the case at all. I happen to be a gypsy in every sense of, I love the nomadic kind of lifestyle. I love being able to pick up and go. I love the opportunity to experience new foods, new cultures, new people. It doesn't mean that it's easy by any means, because it's not, but I think that I am better at what I do, and I'm a better just human being.
Yeah.
By all of the world experiences that I have been afforded. And really that the Air Force, some of it was when I was a child and my parents were in the Air Force. Like the Air Force afforded me those opportunities. But on the flip side, it's a double-edged sword, right? Because there's also this sense. So when I was growing up and my parents were active duty, the word resiliency kind of became the buzzword. Like it was the new thing. It was the big initiative. And so it was, everybody, the military kids are resilient. And yes, that is true. We are resilient. It's also the word that I hate the most. And in reference to children, because we've morphed, as culture does, we've morphed from our military kids are really resilient, yay, and like cheering them on, to our expectation is that you will be resilient, just deal. There are times where I miss my friends and I miss pieces of wherever I call home. And I miss, just like you do. They have the same issues that go along with being an adult human in this world. And sometimes those issues are, hey, I've got a single parent for 6 months because my spouse deployed. Or sometimes it's, hey, there's issues with my housing right now. I can't find housing. I've got to live in the hotel for a while. And so I would just say, if you do see a service member, thank them, ask them about where home is, ask them about their life. They would love to tell you, especially, I know, you see service members in the airport all the time, right? Because they're flying to wherever. So don't be afraid to talk to them and ask them about, hey, what's it like? Because they have fascinating jobs too. They get to do really cool things. When my parents worked the space shuttle launches in California. They were security forces, and that's what they did. That was a large part of what they did, like in their early careers, which I think is so cool. I don't know. It's just such a big question. No.
Yeah. It is worth because I doubt that this is that important, but it is worth saying for the radio edit that we did seek clearance from your base supervisor to be able to have this conversation. We did follow the right channels, so that is in place, and that disclaimer. I promise NSA that disclaimer will be in all of the audio and the YouTube and etc.
And I don't speak for the Army.
Exactly. Both of our opinions are our own.
Absolutely.
Own opinion. Big disclaimer. So is Leavenworth starting to feel like home?
It depends on the day. The Midwest is different, right? So, yeah.
The other piece that I think is particularly fascinating, and the one reason why I happen to have heard the name of the town at all, is what you described as Leavenworth is also home to military jail.
Yes. Yes. So Leavenworth is home to the largest maximum security military prison in the United States. And we have more than one jail on Leavenworth. And so some, because not everybody is in maximum security for the rest of their life. Some are here for more minor offenses, and so are only here for a couple of years.
Sure.
But yeah, so we're in what we call directorates. And so my directorate actually differs, like here at the local chapel, differs from the DB's directorate. But we recognize that, hey, like there's not a DRE assigned to the jail.
Sure.
It's very locked down, right? You have to have all these passes and clearances and checks, but our chaplains have to function in a pluralistic context that they don't necessarily know all the time. Like they do get schooling and things for it, but like we have hundreds of approved faith groups that we can support. And so is it fair to ask a chaplain to also support or to also know the ins and outs, the holy books, the traditions, the rituals of hundreds of faith groups? No, that's complicated. And they would still be studying. Like they would never actually be chaplains. They would just be continually studying. And so that's where I, as a DRE, get to come in, because I get to be the person who deep dives for them and finds them what they need and kind of partners with them in that.
There's such an interesting partnership, and that's just the other thing that I observe about that is just that's such a pragmatic solution to such a complicated problem. Like you're a little bit about education theory, who needs to know a lot about academic theology, who needs to know a little bit about religious practice and spiritual practice theory, and who needs to have interfaith competency. Of course, a licensed clergy person could not even remotely be expected to be competent, let alone have a level of advanced proficiency that you do. I would say from the way that you have described it, I would say that it's art, to be able to manage all of those things. To think that a clergy person would have bandwidth for all of those things.
Well, and so the Army views my position and any DRE position actually as an educator. So we're not listed as clergy. We are educators, because it involves that practicum, that curriculum, that research, those pieces. And I like to think of myself as yes, an educator, but also like the out-of-the-box problem solver, right? Because the military has a very unique set of needs. So I'll use my previous location. So I was at Joint Base San Antonio during COVID. And if you don't know anything about Joint Base San Antonio, I was at Lackland, which is where basic military training for the Air Force and the Space Force happens. So Lackland hosts basic military training and technical training for a large majority of the Air Force, specifically security forces. And so that's a lengthy-ish technical school, but also basic training. And if you know anything about basic training, you know that you are basically in with this group of people for the 7.5, 8 weeks that you are in basic training. You eat, sleep, and breathe together, basically, for your entire 8 weeks. And but what we ran into was, with COVID, everything locked down. We had all of these, I'm going to say kids, all these trainees who were coming in from all over the United States, all over the world, really, to come and be a part of basic training. And they were potentially bringing COVID with them. This was before vaccination. This was before anything. And so they had to start looking at, hey, do we need to quarantine them? And so there were these processes put into place, right? So one of the things that would happen when they would identify COVID, they themselves, who are 17, 18, 19, 20 years old, sitting in a room by themselves for 14 days. by themselves and with no real interaction with another human. I believe, if I remember correctly, they got their phones, which, because you don't normally have your phone, so they at least had that connection, like, to the outside world. But if you have ever been a human who has not had contact with another human for a couple of days, things go south very quickly, specifically with your mental health. And so all of a sudden, we had this unintentional kind of mental health issue coming up that our chaplains, because our chaplains were counseling, right? And so they were counseling all these trainees, and everything was, I'm lonely, I'm homesick, which homesickness is a very normal counseling trend for basic training, but it turned into, this is more than just loneliness. This is starting to develop into anxiety. This is potentially starting to develop into suicidal ideation. And so we had to sit down as a chaplain corps, as a team, and say, okay, what can we do in because we provide support, right? Like, we're not in charge there, but we do provide spiritual support. What can we do to provide support to help mitigate mental health crises? Because we already know, like, in America, the mental health crisis is larger anyways, but what can we do to help mitigate that mental health crises when they're here? And so one of the ways that we became kind of out of the box with it was, we started, anytime we'd find out that there were trainees who were quarantined, we would say, hey, do you subscribe to a particular faith? If they would contact a chaplain, because a lot of times they would contact a chaplain just to talk to somebody, because big thing that people don't know, or a lot of people don't know, chaplains in the military have 100% confidentiality. They're the only people. So when you talk to a chaplain cannot say anything. They cannot be taken to court to testify about, like, it is 100% confidential. So a lot of times they would, they wanted to talk to a chaplain. And if they called a chaplain, the chaplain would ask, hey, do you subscribe to a specific faith group? Because chaplains don't counsel in their specific faith group all of the time. Sometimes because of need, right? Like, sometimes a trainee, if you don't request a specific faith, you might get a chaplain of a different faith. And that's part of the pluralistic context. And the chaplains, shout out to the Lackland team, the chaplains were very equipped to handle those things. But so they would ask, and if they came back and they, whatever the faith tradition was, if they had a faith tradition, they'd then come to me and say, okay, let's get them a packet. And we would basically create, like, these packets of resources, of things for them, of devotionals, of in whatever faith, maybe daily prayers, maybe liturgies, whatever it was. But we would try to create something for them, allowed them to potentially experience their God in the midst of this suffering and this isolation, because we were all going through it, so a lot of what I do, one of the things that I love about what I do is that I get to bring that to the table. I get to be that out of the box person who says, hey, maybe let's try it this way. We recognized that the tech trainees, they don't typically have vehicles at that point. So they were walking back and forth to class every day. But what do we do when we drive or we walk back and forth? A lot of times we listen to podcasts. That's our thing. And so recognizing, what are the generational trends? What is this generation into? And then building off of that to provide religious support, and getting outside the box with it, and trying different things, and being okay to say, hey, this didn't work. We ended up building out just discussion questions for a couple of different podcasts for different faith groups.
Sure.
And a soldier from those faith groups who facilitated those questions. And so they could, and it was something that they could do in their dorms. So they would listen to the podcast. The podcast, was generally 30 minutes to an hour. They'd listen to it through the course of the week. And then, whatever night they picked, like they could literally sit across the hall from each other while they were social distancing, but also have a discussion about the podcast that they were listening to. So,
wow, what an elegant solution to, once again, a very complicated problem. Just wow.
But I think we have to get creative, right? Like, and no matter what space we're in, I don't think that our problems are so complicated that they can't be, like we actually started talking a little bit before we pressed record. 90% of our problems can be fixed with a nap and a snack.
Yes.
and that's a really very small view of the 5,000 feet view. But, I think there's something that's just really beautiful in the simplicity of not overcomplicating faith, not overcomplicating needs. Is there always more we could do? Absolutely.
Yeah.
But that's with anything. That's with any social program. That's with any faith tradition. That's anything. There's always more we can do. And so it's my hope, that the families that I serve and the population that I serve, like that they come to the table knowing that they're loved, that they're cared for, and we're doing the best that we can to serve them in the ways that they need. But that we're also seeing them for who they are, that they can come to the table and be 100% authentically who they are in whatever that looks like and whatever that mess is. I'm not the norm for, you will find if you were in my office, you would find I collect religious kitsch toys. And so I collect from any faith. And so I have like a Buddy Jesus piggy bank that's like, it's Jesus like this. And I have Pope soap, which has it's just a little bar of soap that has, I think it's Pope John Paul's face on it. And I have a sign that says inhale tacos, exhale negativity. Like I have all of these things all over my office because that's who I am. That's my personality. And I want people, when they encounter me, to realize like, yes, I do Army. I work for the United States government. I am passionate about the opportunity that I have to serve my country in that capacity. But what that doesn't mean either is that I have to, if I can't come to the table and be authentically myself. I mean, who does really?
There's something that I'm wondering. I'm thinking about the work that we do as religious professionals, and we also have personal spiritualities, personal systems of belief, personal faiths as well.
I did my undergrad and served for a number of years, and then went to seminary after serving in the church for a couple of years. And going to seminary was amazing and life-changing. I think it's one of those things, like if you are a Christ follower, I think that you should go to seminary or just audit a seminary class because they're fascinating.
Yeah.
And because you encounter, that's really a place where you encounter people who differ, like truly differ in beliefs, because you come from different contexts. And so I had that. I was serving in a town that it was a rural farm town. Shout out to Fulton, Kentucky. They're the home of the Banana Festival. Look it up. It's great. But I was serving in this rural farm town, and I was completely out of my element. I moved to go to seminary from Dallas, Texas, one of the largest cities in the United States, to Fulton, Kentucky. There were 1,300 people in Walmart. And when I got there, not only was it culture shock, there is poverty. There is lots of families who live under the poverty line, are on some sort of social assistance, things of that nature. And I had kids who I had decided, because I was like, okay, the can be built on love and grace. And that was the way that I strove to partner with God, if you will, to create a youth ministry and create humans, like help be a part of the creation of humans that were good people, we're good citizens.
Yeah.
We're aware of what was going on in the world, but also didn't look at their circumstances and say, I can't get out of this. I can't change my life. And that's not that can sometimes happen with poverty, because we talk about a lot about poverty can be a cycle. And my big thing was, like, I had several kids who were farmers, and I didn't know a farmer. I had never met a farmer in my life. I mean, like it wasn't a part of my upbringing, right? Like, so, but I had farm kids. I will never forget this. I had a kid in my youth group. His name is John Grant McConnell, and John Grant was in the 7th grade. He came in one day, and I always did, instead of doing highs and lows, which is a typical kind of youth group, like, hey, what's your high for the week? What's your low for the week? My question was always, where did you feel like you saw God, and where did you feel like God was absent? And he and then we would pray about those things. And I distinctly remember one night at youth group, he said, we need to pray for rain. And I was like, why? Like, it rains all the time, like, whatever. And he was like, no, Tori, like it doesn't. And if we don't pray for rain, the crops won't grow and my family won't be able to feed people. 7th grade. And I went, oh my gosh. And he, like, that just completely blew my mind, because never had I thought that a 7th grader, number one, but also that this kid who grew up in this rural town would internalize the responsibility that he felt like he and his family had to feed people, because they're so passionate about it. So stinking passionate about it, about farming, about agriculture. Life-changing for me, because I went, number one, heck yeah, teenagers can do all the things. But also, number two, that's a very basic, simple prayer. That's a simple, and yet his faith in that moment was so powerful. It was, I believe that God will provide rain, but we do have to pray for it. I would say, it continues to affect. Having grown up in this more conservative and then moving towards something that looks a little less conservative as I've studied, as I've, just done deep dives on different subjects, but also in the context of what I do, it's my responsibility to learn about these other faiths. It's also my responsibility, the Army, because of the separation of church and state. And so it's something that I recognize, it's this really unique kind of place to be in, that they can't ask me. And so there is a piece of that is really freeing as a female who has been in ministry, because there are spaces where I am not allowed. As clergy, I am not allowed to serve. I'm told, shut up and color. You can't be a worship leader. You can't be any of these things. And that's a really hard place for me to be. And so, and those are the places where the Army is like, we don't care. We can't ask you about that. And so that's a really, to me, a beautiful thing, because I think so often in church, it's taken on more importance than it really should. So people stop looking at what are the gifts and graces that you bring to the table, and start looking at what are the ways that you can't fulfill your call, that we don't feel like, based on our perceptions, that you can't fulfill your call.
There's so much as you said, there's so much just love and grace in that, because there's an element of dogma that is removed when the sect specific components of religious practice are no longer a barrier, which I just find fascinating. Because yes, you're absolutely right. There are many places where your identity markers make you ineligible for ministry, and not just in Christian traditions. And that same thing could be said of so many different identity markers that are held by so many people. I want to move us along because we're already over time, and I want to be, and I just feel like I could ask hours about what your experience has been in doing this work that I know so little about. But I'm going to try and sort of move us back to format a little bit. I wonder, in those moments that get very difficult, that get tiring, fatiguing, exasperating, what are the little graces that help keep spirits high when morale is low and times are tough?
So music has always been a really big part of my life. And we actually, the chapel that I work in has the sanctuary area for that chapel has a Steinway and Steinway piano. Yeah. And it's beautiful and it's been well taken care of. And so we're in the deep throes of sacramental prep for a lot of our folks. And so that is something that it's important for me to know more about. And so I actually went to the priest. We have a phenomenal priest right now. And I said, hey, if I wanted to start, because I have a good working knowledge of Catholicism, but I said, if I really wanted to like deep dive as if I were potentially going to convert to Catholicism, if you will, where would you have me start? Like, what would be the text that you would read? And he said, Ignatius of Antioch, start there. Yeah. And I was like, okay. So I jumped on Amazon and got the letters of Ignatius of Antioch and have started. And so, yeah, but I think I think it's really important that there's balance, right? So at the end of the day, yes, we work with people. Yes, we work in a faith setting, but we are still very human and we still need rest. We still need time away. We still need all of the basic things that come with being a human. And this is still a job. And I think when we get to a place where we make our professions the entirety of our identity, we lose ourselves. We lose our ability to be 100% authentic. And so that's something that I am really particular about is, making room for what are the things that I like to do on my days off, setting those boundaries of, hey, if you call me on my day off, you're absolutely going to have to leave me a voicemail. And I might listen to it. I might wait until, my next day, but trying to create those boundaries, even though I don't have a family in the traditional sense, right? Like I have a dog. My parents and my brother do not live anywhere near me, but so I take time to reconnect with them. Maybe it's phone calls or it's FaceTimes to friends or it's things of those nature or just things that I love. I've got a good friend from college who lives near here. And she was like, hey, there's this big sunflower field that has millions of sunflowers every year. And they only exist for like 2 to 3 weeks. Sunflowers are the Kansas state flower. Let's go. And I was like, okay, let's go to the sunflower fields, so finding those little ways to kind of feed myself, if you will, do things that I love, do things that I'm passionate about outside of anything that goes on at the office, because it can't be my identity. If it becomes the whole of my identity, I will lose myself.
Yeah. That's so incredibly well said. I'm sure that this is a much more complicated problem than what it's seeming in my head. I'm thinking of veterans and the world that you've described, where being a soldier is the entirety of an enlisted person's experience, and how we, as religious professionals, how we can be a part of helping that sort of acclimation to civilian life. So this leads in a little bit into my final question, and I suspect might be one way that you answer it, but the final question that gets asked everybody is, what do you want the world to look like when you're done with it?
I want to have been the person that I needed when I was that age. I want to have been that person for somebody else, that somebody who encountered me laughed or felt like it was okay to be authentically themselves, or, fell in love with whatever.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of a cliche Christian term, if you will, but like at the end, I want to be told, well done, good and faithful servant. And whatever that looks like, why would you ever support something that looks so drastically different from how you grew up or what you knew? And so for me, it's just, beauty can be found in anything.
Yeah.
But I think it's our responsibility to remind people that there is beauty around them, even if it's just the daisy popping out of the cement on your walk to work, or, you're walking down the sidewalk to get a sandwich or whatever. Yeah. I want people to feel like they have a stronger faith, that the world isn't always on fire. I think it will always feel like it's on fire, but there are places where things are not on fire. And I hope that I leave these faith groups that I encounter better than I found them, not necessarily by my own doing, but just by being a person willing to stand next to them, to be an ally, to fight for their ability to worship, to have education, and to, learn in their faith tradition.
What is one small thing a person like me as a civ can do to at least be more mindful of what sorts of spiritual needs our service people have, and how we can at least be, if we can't necessarily help in meaningful ways, how we can at least be more informed about what is needed, or not cause more harm.
Yeah, honestly, community, right? Like, community is such a big part of how a military family and single soldiers, how they move through the world. They're in a community at work of people who in the Army, they call them battle buddies. In the Air Force, they call them their wingman. But, they're battle buddy. They're people who they do life with, the people who would take a bullet for them. Be willing to be in community with somebody who looks different, maybe somebody who doesn't subscribe to your faith context, and let it be okay. We don't have to agree. I don't have to agree with your faith tradition to support your faith tradition, to support your right to worship freely, to support your right to have incense at your service. But I can make a difference in making sure that your faith tradition is advocated for in the spaces where I am sitting at the table. And so, things that are interfaith are a great way, in my mind, are a great conversation starter, because most large communities in a city have some sort of interfaith something that goes on. Lots of colleges have interfaith things that go on. Largely, we insulate ourselves, right? Like, we protect ourselves. We look for people who are similar. And so I think it's this constant striving of, while it would be really normal for me to gravitate towards maybe one group or one person, maybe looking for the people who are on the margins, who are different, just having a conversation. Like I said, like, it doesn't have to be political. It's not something that you don't have to agree on anything, but even just the willingness to sit down and listen. Because at the end of the day, I think so many people allow others to be heard and known. Maybe their families, they've never been heard or known.
That's incredible. Tori, thank you so much for being on the show, for lingering and sharing with us all of this incredible grace and wisdom and laughter.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate getting the opportunity to tell people a little bit more about what we do and about the difference that we get to make.
Hey fam, it's Polly. If you liked that video, want to join the conversation, be part of this community, click the subscribe button so you don't miss a thing Uncommon Good. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.